And according to OBS, we are live. All three places, YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. How is everyone doing today? We'll have to see who shows up in which chat, but how you doing, Chris?
I've been better.
Yeah, it's been a rough couple of days for me too. I might flake out on the video, especially since it just said my encoding was overloaded. Is this... Someone let me know if I might just flake out on the video again.
Seems like every time you try to show the world your pretty face, something happens and you have to just ditch it.
Yeah.
No offense,
I don't know, it says the CPU's only at 15%. So I
maybe
don't
the
know
camera
why.
maybe the camera thinks you're ugly.
I think I just need a new camera. Yep, encoding overloaded. All right, let's pull it out. Okay. You can't see me, but you can hear me.
I can
Let's see who
you,
shows up on a Saturday night who has nothing better to do than sit at home and play live streams. I honestly don't know what's the best night for a live stream, but we'll see what Weekend does. So everyone, yes, you can watch this also on Odyssey and Rumble, so check the links below. And also look at the links for streamlabs.com/ShaneKillian, where you can do a donation or a super chat. The super chat will pop up on the screen. There'll be a low poly me doing a little dance. So
yeah. Well, you know, the funny thing is, Shane, is that when you're a kid, you're always looking forward to the weekend, but the sad reality is that once you get older and you get a real job, you find out the weekend is just another day.
Yeah, you just have other work to do, work around the house or whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if you have a job that gives you the weekends off, you know, like you said, you're either cleaning the house, you know, doing your other stuff, or in some circumstances, you're just so exhausted from work, you're like, you know what? I don't want to go out. I just want to get something. I just want to go to bed and just veg out, waking up only for bathroom and food breaks.
Yeah,
I've had days like that where I'm just like, you know what? I just want to lock myself in my room and I don't want anyone bothering me.
Yep. All right, no one in the chats as of yet. You got a topic or anything you want to talk about?
There's monarcho liberals there. I guess his chat
is mine frozen then?
Yeah, could be. Yeah. He said, "I have nothing better to do than sit down and watch some dudes talk about how bad government is."
Yeah,
we don't always talk.
We don't have to talk about that. We can talk about whatever you want. Dapperton wants to come on sometime to talk about movies, but we'll have to see if we can work that out at some point. We've been over the objective morality thing.
Yeah.
Although in my case, I think ethics is a better word than morality.
Yeah. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the truth is there are some, morality is heavily dependent. It can depend on the culture situation, and as some YouTubers like Metatron have pointed out, the times,
It just really depends on what sort of costs you're imposing on third parties.
Yeah, have you ever watched Metatron before?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you might like him. He's an Italian. He's an Italian guy. He lives in America now and he can speak English. He used to be a linguistic professor. He's really into history, especially the Roman Empire and medieval history. He's also a HEMA practitioner. He's kind of like an Italian American he's kind of like an Italian version of Shadiversity in a way.
Oh, cool. Yeah, checkmate. Some atheists think it's objective, some think it's subjective, and I don't think we're going to solve that tonight. I've just got my videos on the matter, and no one's been able to really poke any holes in it yet. Why don't you do more responses to statists than religious ones? I do.
Yeah, I mean, if I recall correctly, in some circumstances, you kind of have to. You've even admitted you've had to force yourself, to watch nothing but religious bullcrap. Because some of the stathists who follow you are like, "Why are you always ranting on the government? I liked it better when you were picking on religious fundamentalists."
Well, there was a time where it was just like for like a year, it was almost all statists I was going after. And then I did one video where I went after religious, and it was like, why are you always going after religious people?
Mm.
People are just like that.
Well, and to be fair, another thing too, and it's kind of like what you mentioned about how you have a strict policy that you will never accept a police department for being biggest bogon or idiot extraordinaire unless it's something really really stupid because there's always a story of police abusing their power that it's redundant.
Yeah, I mean, that it kind of like give me something new to talk
Yeah.
about.
So it's kind of the same thing with religious people. If there's a pastor going around saying evolution is not real, it's like, why bother? Because it's pretty much going to be the guy saying the exact same thing you had to make the argument.
Yep.
The only way you're going to respond to it is only if he says something crazy like, did you know that fingernails prove evolution isn't real? Then you might give it a look.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
something
that's
weird.
great.
I am
That's
working on one. It's a bit of a longer video. It's not that long. I think it's like 11 minutes, but it's kind of packed. A guy on Odyssey going after generative AI. So
mm,
I'm doing that too. I don't know if that will be statism or religion or its other own category or something.
mm. Speaking of AI, I've been contemplating maybe because to be because I'm kind of getting tired of my job, and I'm not going to quit it anytime soon, but I don't want to stay there forever, but I don't know what else to do. And the only thing I've always wanted to do was tell my own stories, and I'm thinking of maybe getting hold of an AI and making my own independent comics.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work with comics.
Yeah, true. That is
The
true. So,
problem with doing this with comics is consistency, because you can
yeah.
put in all the prompts you want and get a character just the way you want. Okay, that's the first panel. Now, the next panel, I need the person to be angry and yelling.
Mm,
Will you change that? It's going to change what the character looks like.
yeah.
And you got to
I
kind
mean,
of,
that's the reason why in real life comic books almost always just have one artist and not multiple ones. It's because they need to maintain that they
yeah.
need to maintain that.
Well, and there are also techniques that they use, like there are 5 basic head shapes,
Yeah.
variations for male and female, and everything else is just putting in the details. Also, other things for how you do the model sheets, for the proportions and everything, so that you can do it more consistently.
Like I have heard, I don't know how true it is. Like I've heard they do it at Disney, but I don't know if they do it at the other comic places. But they have a very strict policy that if you're going to get on board as one of their artists, before you can even get hired, they basically say, okay, here's the heads of several basic characters. You have to draw them perfectly.
Yeah.
You have to draw them 5 times consistently and with only a bare minimum margin of error for that exact reason because they want consistency. Yeah, you don't want to end up like Greg Land. You
I'm
probably
not
don't know
sure
who
who
that
that
is.
is.
He was a Marvel artist. Now, granted, he was a genuine artist, but then he started cheaping out and he started tracing, using tracing or references for his artwork. And many people pointed out, not only is it kind of lazy, it caused many of the comics he wrote to be completely inconsistent. Like one character would look like this in one panel, then in the next panel they would look completely different.
I've just seen art, in comics that's just all over the place. Some of them I think 4-year-olds could do better. But then on the other end, you have the amazing ones like John Romita Jr.
Hmm. Speaking of which, I've been watching Razor Fist. He's big into comics. You've heard of Razor Fist, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't agree with.
he lives in Maricopa County, and he's been cluing a lot of people in about the shenanigans there regarding
Mm,
the elections and everything.
yeah. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's funny.
He is.
And you know what's really cool is that that voice he puts on, apparently that actually is mostly an act because there's actual videos of him where he's actually being real life and he's being his own self. He sounds nothing like his character when he's wearing the sunglasses.
Yeah.
He's actually a very soft spoken person, and he's admitted, yeah, that guy you see there going, going. I'm Razor Fist, God fucking speed. that's an act he's mostly pulling off, you know.
Yeah, I kind of figured that.
I mean, it's kind of like it's kind of like Lord Killian. Like, you know,
Yeah.
you don't sound like that all the time. You know what I mean? I know there's a meme going around that when you disagree with someone, you go liar, liar, liar. But that only really happens when you're doing a Lord Killian response. Political checkmate wants to know what's your major in college.
I was an art major with a music minor.
Oh, oh, what restaurant do you work at? Yeah, that's an old joke in Hollywood.
Actually doing work that's somewhat related in my field, so
Well, you know, to be fair, you know, and many people say this. We like to hate on the arts majors, but I've heard, you know, from a lot of people say there is genuine practical, purpose for art degree. The problem is that a lot of people go for like, you know, liberal arts. So it's like, no, go into like architectural artwork or advertising artwork. You know,
yeah.
because those are artistic jobs that actually do pay. You know, graphic designer is a genuine job. It's a genuine, well paid job. You
Oh,
know,
yeah, and I did that for
yeah,
years.
yeah.
It's mostly, video and TV commercials now.
Well, we don't really have to worry about that, Mr. Merchant, because the market's destroying them. You know, a lot of college people, they're graduating, you know, with SJW ideologies, and they're
Yeah.
realizing the market in the real world doesn't give a crap about you know your gender equality or your pronouns.
Get woke, go broke.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just
Actually,
all
I
the
like.
people who think that they're just owed a job where they get paid $20 an hour for doing nothing or whatever.
Yeah. As for me, I briefly attended community college and then I dropped out due to stress. And I've kind of wanted to go back, but the sad reality is that I can't stand the idea of school.
Yeah.
I'm just one of those people where you know you can't force me to sit down for 5 hours a day and read something redundant and make me do it over and over again. You know,
But nowadays, if you find an idea for something you wanna do, there's plenty of, like, online learning and tutorials and stuff like that.
I'm thinking of doing that. If I ever do go back and get an education, I think I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna go to like a well accredited, you know, like website, you know, that does that and just do a, you know, like the biggest thing I hate about college, even community colleges, why the frick does it have to that it doesn't take a minimum of 2 years, you know, just to learn something simple like no joke. I saw this one video of a guy who was he works as an auto mechanic and he took a look at you know the course you know for a bare basic you know engineering curriculum and he found out it took them a year and a half. It's like and this is spread out over an entire year. I could teach this to a guy in less than 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you get YouTube videos without using premium to download the copy? YouTube DL is free. It's open source.
Well, like I said, Minarko Liberal, we're already seeing that, you know. I mean, we're seeing that in Hollywood, you know. What happens when Hollywood's announces, you know, we're gonna make a remake of this famous movie, but we're gonna make the main character, you know, a transsexual, sexual, gay, black trans woman. Those people are like, yeah, I'll pass.
It's
I,
kind of like it's becoming a substitute for creativity is the
yeah,
problem.
yeah. And you know, the funny irony, and you know, many people have said this, it's like, you know, listen, we're not against gay, trans, or minority people. Just write your freaking own stories. If you want to make a movie about a gay transsexual non-binary superhero, fine. But create your own superhero. Don't say, hey, let's make Captain America a gay transsexual non-binary superhero.
Or like I said, there's the Little Mermaid is black now. Do you have any idea how many African mermaid stories there are? Why don't you tell one of those
Mm,
instead of taking a Scandinavian character and putting her in blackface?
yeah.
Or is it a
It's
cash grab?
yeah. Yeah, that's another thing too that Metatron points out in some of his videos because you know some people are like because you know some people have accused him of being racist and they're like you know what's wrong you know with having you know black or Hispanic you know characters like in a movie that takes place in ancient Roman times and he just points out because the cold fact is most people in ancient Rome were white.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not because screw minorities or white
And
supremacy. It was just geographics.
and they try, like, in these, ancient Rome or medieval Britain or whatever, they try to put black guys in and say, well, they're Muslims. But the Muslims at the time were Arabic, not black.
Oh yeah, I don't get why some people think Muslims is an African language, because I've seen videos of people that live in the Islamic world. Most of them are white skinned, and the only reason they seem to be dark is not because of the melatonin, but because they live in an area that's very sunny, so their skin's a little darker from tanning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know the name Prax Ben, but I can't think of anything he's done.
I have no clue who those are.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have no idea about Mentis Wave.
I'm gonna contact Executioner, see if he wants to come on.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm. On a non-political move, I was last week I was watching a movie with Tim, aka Lord Hawkeye. We were watching Ernest Scared Stupid.
Oh, that's an old one.
Yeah. Yeah, he said that movie used to scare him as a kid, and after watching it, like, it didn't scare me now, but I'd be like, yeah, if I was a 6-year-old kid and I saw it for the first time, I'd be terrified of it.
I've gotten Heather into those old black and white horror movies.
Mm.
Dracula and Frankenstein, the Wolfman, all those.
People fail to realize some of those can be genuinely scary, especially if you're in the right mood for it. Like, it's one silent movie that still gives me the creeps, Nosferatu.
It was good, but you also have to remember that a lot of times the object wasn't really to scare you,
Yeah.
because a lot of these were more mysteries than anything else.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, if I recall correctly, in the movie Dracula, it's not about oh, there's an evil vampire going in there. It's all about there's a series of murders and paranormal phenomenon, and they're basically saying, what the heck is going on here? Why are there people being found dead with their blood drained, and why are all the wolves and bats acting up all of a sudden, and why is it foggy in the middle of summer? Stuff like that.
Yeah, and we recently watched Mark of the Vampire, Bela Lugosi, where they kind of did a switch up at the end where they weren't actually vampires. It was a murder plot to kill someone to make people think that vampires did it.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, that was actually supposed to be a remake of Lon Chaney's last film, London After Midnight, which had a similar premise.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
trying to find that one.
launch a vampire London After Midnight.
London After Midnight.
Yeah, you probably never will, because the last known copy was destroyed in the 1960s in a theater fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a lost film. There are compilations, like there are screenshots, and there's been like a compilation of the screenshots, but the actual film itself is presumed lost unless we can find one in someone's great grandpa's basement attic somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you never know. They've recovered some of them.
Oh yeah, perfectly good example is the first Frankenstein movie from 1910. Yep. For many years, many people felt that film was lost in the 1920s in a theater fire, but then, like, I don't know if it was the 80, I don't know if it was the 2000s or 2010s. A guy came forward and said, "Hey, that lost 1910 Frankenstein movie? I have a copy." And they're like, "Wait a minute, you have a copy? Where'd you get it from?" It was in my grandma's attic. She was known to collect old films, and this just happened to be one of them.
And for some reason, it was really hard to find a copy of Werewolf of London in English,
Hmm.
because it was made in English, but a lot of the copies were released were German with English subtitles.
Hmm. That wouldn't happen. Political checkmate, because libertarian society would recognize that the boy has the right to live too.
Right. Yeah, that would
A
that would
collective,
definitely
a
be an act of
collective,
aggression.
yeah, a collectivist would say society would say, yeah, go ahead, eat the boy.
A utilitarian would say, "Hey, you know, it's the life of one boy if 10 people are going to starve."
Yeah. I love it when some people try to say it's like, well, you'd rather, well, you'd pull the same thing if you saw a scenario where like two people were like there were 12 people hooked up to a train track, two were on one track and the other 10 were on the other, and you'd save the 10 people. It's like, yeah, but not because of utilitarian purposes. We're just trying to minimize the damage.
Yeah, it's such a contrived scenario anyway.
Yeah,
If you actually read where that comes from, the original source actually points out all the problems with it,
yeah.
which everyone ignores.
Like, to be honest, whoever set that up, why the frick is he doing that? That sounds like something Jigsaw would do.
Well, and you also have to think about the trolley driver and the people in the trolley and what you're going to do to them. That's like the whole thing about, if you push someone out of the way of the bus, it's, well, if you cause an act of aggression, well, you saved their life. What if they wanted to die? Well, what about the bus driver? What do you think it's going to
Yeah,
do to him,
yeah,
to run over someone, even if it's not his fault?
yeah, exactly.
They just want to take all context and everything out of them, and it just doesn't work that way. Same with the
Yeah,
flagpole problem, same with the lifeboat scenario, same with all of them.
yeah. Same thing where if you're involved in a car accident and the paramedics rescue you, and in the process they accidentally hurt you, and you're like, "Oh, you injured me." Actually, if I recall correctly, there actually is a rule that says that if you rescue someone from something like that, and it can be demonstrated that they would have been much more seriously injured or even killed had you not interfered, they can't sue you for that. That's why the plot of The Incredibles doesn't work out, because in
Right.
real life, if that guy tried to say, "Hey, I tried to jump, but Mr. Incredible sued me and broke my arm in the process when I wanted to die," it's like tough, tough crap. And actually,
Well,
going
I
back to the
mean,
bus
he
driver.
would have been putting, the lives of others at risk too.
Well, yeah, because if I recall from the movie, there was a crowd gathered because he wanted his suicide to be public. He could have easily have landed on someone and hurt them. Believe it or
Not to
not,
mention
it's
the trauma of watching someone die.
yeah. I actually had an interesting idea. I actually had an interesting idea for a sequel to The Incredibles. I doubt Disney will ever make it, but it's a neat idea, and it's basically where super it basically actually kind of sort of answers the problem. Well, if superheroes are all gone, what about supervillains? What's stopping them from coming back? And basically, in my story, it's basically saying the ones that are like seriously a danger, like the government hired a special forces to track them down, and the ones that are kind of like the cliche villain of the week, they're basically told, listen, you'll be given a full blown presidential pardon, but you must vow never to commit crime again. Because that is something that does kind of make me question. It's like okay, you get rid of superheroes, what about supervillains?
Their first thought is the entire society would want to eat a child. Yeah, that says a lot more about them than it does about us.
Yeah.
Well, and also any society where everyone wanted to eat the boy, they'd eat the boy.
Mm,
Yeah, in a democracy, 51% would vote to eat the boy, and it doesn't matter what the other 49% say.
yeah. That's why I laugh at those. That's why I laugh at those people that say we're just trying to preserve American democracy. It's like you guys only give a crap about democracy when it only affects you.
In a libertarian society, all you really need is one person with a gun to acknowledge the boy's rights.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching this on Razorfist. It's a perfectly good example of the left, ironically, going against the democracy they claim they're trying to preserve. It was the case of Sheriff Arpaio, because people, it's as much as you want to deny it, Sheriff Arpaio, he was democratically elected.
That's true.
Yeah, so by saying no, we don't want him because we don't like how he's handling illegal immigrants, well, isn't that going against the will of the people of the county who voted for him? That's the paradox of
Well, and it's
democracy.
also like we have to move in and use the courts stop to stop all of these things to save democracy when they're talking about things that were enacted by a democratically elected state legislature.
Yeah, I mean, and not to mention, many people need to be reminded of this. The reason why the U.S. Constitution has all these anti-democratic policies in it is because America wasn't supposed to be a democracy.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I understand, that whole point of that old Constitution about how the Constitution doesn't apply to you and you don't need to know about it. But I do think people should still read it because that's the reason why politicians are getting away with all this stuff is because we let them.
Right.
Yeah, they keep granting themselves this power and they say, "Oh yeah, it's in the Constitution," and people are like, "Okay." Whereas we need more people to say, "Actually, you can't do that." Like a perfectly good example is Brandon Herrera pointing out, it's like, "No, no, no, Mr. Biden, you can't grant ATF all this power. Only Congress can do that." Yeah, that's the thing. Not a lot of people fail to realize the ATF, when it was first founded, it was never intended to be a law enforcement agency. Its job was simply to collect and file paperwork.
It was a tax organization for
Yeah,
collecting taxes.
yeah, its job was to collect taxes and categorize, all the people. It's like, okay, who has all these explosives and guns and alcohol industries, and then in the 1980s, when the war on drugs took off, the gun trade, was going alongside with the drug trade, and the ATF were like, oh yeah, we want in on some of that action too.
Yeah, I mean the reason for it was the Interstate Commerce Clause, and that
Mm.
was how they wormed that in. I mean, thought experiment. How do you define the rich? Is the rich the top 1%? Okay, you eat the rich, you get rid of the top 1%. Well, guess what? They're still a top 1%. You've just changed who it is. Now you have to eat them? How are you going to
Sorry, I
have
just
their
grab it.
how are you going to have that's kind of like a corollary to what Milton Friedman would ask. They talk about, oh, we got the bottom 20%, the bottom. Okay, how do you propose to get rid of the bottom 20%? How do you propose to make it so there's not a bottom 20%?
Mm. Speaking of libertarian societies and all that, Shane, that question I asked you for the AMA, there's one thing I was a little bit disappointed that you didn't acknowledge, because the Bears weren't the only thing that people were considering about Gotham. They were also saying that, oh yeah, when libertarians took over the town, all these pedophiles came in, and then the town's first murder occurred in several years. Personally, I think it's just a causation fallacy.
Yeah, I mean, none of those were any bigger. But I mean, when you talk about Grafton, the one everyone comes up with is the Bears.
Hmm.
So I figured that was the thrust of it.
I kind of thought that was suspicious too, because I'm like, okay, New Hampshire. What were most of these bear attacks? Grizzly bears. Okay, let me look it up. Where's the grizzly bear predominantly located? And sure enough, the grizzly bear's most prominent location is the Northeast United States, where New Hampshire is.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you live in an area that has a lot of grizzly bears, there's a much higher probability that you're gonna come across a grizzly bear. It's just like the best way. It's just like saying, listen, if you spend a lot of your time driving your car to and from work, and you're driving a lot, your chances of getting in a car accident are higher.
Well, and it's not like there were more grizzly bear attacks.
Hmm.
And how would that even work causally? You elect libertarians and bears attack more? What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah. Yeah, like there's a lot of people claiming it's like, oh yeah, yeah, Grafton went to shit. The the economics collapsed. There were all these people that moved in and the place got overcrowded. Like there was a lot of hyperboles. It's like, to be fair, part of me kind of thinks that some of the complaints came from people that went to Grafton because they're like, oh yeah, libertarians rule. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Wait a minute, I can't do that. This is bull crap.
They can't shoot the bears. Well, they had limited the bear hunting license, and they were trying to get the state to increase it because their population was increasing faster than the allowable licenses could actually control them.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, like hunting licenses are handled by the state or the county, not the city or
Yeah.
town.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Grafton itself had nothing to do with that. They kept going to the state. It was like, look, let us get more hunting licenses.
Yep. That's a sad reason why a lot of these failed city projects kind of fail. Like I don't want to sound like one of those communists that say communism only works when everyone participates. But the sad reality is that even if a town or city does get taken over by libertarians, the problem isn't the town. It's the other neighboring cities surrounding them, because the counties or even the state government is going to say, well, you can't do that. You have to do this. That's the reason why the few libertarians that do take power, they either become corrupted by the power or they get pushed aside out of the way. Because I remember seeing an old John
Yeah, I mean
Stossel interview.
it's not a matter of just getting the right people in power. The system itself is set up that way.
I mean, John Stossel brought this up in a really old video he did where he was interviewing two congressmen, who, even though they were technically Republicans, they identified as libertarians. They really only were Republicans because that's the only way you can get in. And they say, we tried multiple times, to at least, get libertarian views and philosophies on the table. And you know what happened to them? Basically, the rest of Congress told them, yeah, Congressman, just go over there, go to the table, go away.
Oh, we're seeing
Yep.
that kind of thing right now, not with libertarians, but just with the populist wing of the Republican Party. You know how now all the stuff going on with the Speaker for the House, and in
Yeah.
order to get McCarthy the speakership, McCarthy had to make all these promises. He didn't keep a single one of them, so they said, "Okay, you're not speaker anymore." But
Mm.
now they're trying to get some, and there was like this big secret meeting they had where they just said, "Okay, we're just not going to let Jim Jordan be speaker," instead of bringing it to the House floor, so you didn't know who those Republicans were who
I mean,
didn't
if I
want that.
recall
And now
correctly,
they're talking about whatever that is, kicking out, Matt Gaetz and the other people who were involved in getting rid of the speakership. It's like, well, if you'd actually unify around getting a new speaker instead of unifying around that.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what happened. It's kind of like what happened, in the 2008 election. It's like so many Republicans blamed Ron Paul for losing. It's like, no, it's because out of all the people you picked to run against Obama, you picked Romney. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, these are the Republicans who are just hell bent on Ukraine and hell bent on the military spending and hell bent on, raising the debt ceiling and all that.
Mm. Yeah,
Whereas
like you said, like,
most of them actually want to say, "Hey, look, we were put in here to try and get some kind of handle on the spending."
mm. I mean, like I said, there's Republicans, on this side that are actually, pro Ukraine and Israel. They just think, it's like, listen, we don't need to be spending that much money on them, and they're basically being told, nope, 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 you got to vote to spend millions of billions of dollars on the military industrial complex, or else you're not welcome here.
It's all a grift.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the Democrat Party. Like, there's actual Democrats, that are all for, still maintaining things like Social Security and all that, but they do agree. It's like, we might need to, cut down here, because if we keep all the spending, we're going to heck in a handbasket. And they're basically told, oh, you're a traitor to the people.
What I
I
think
mean,
they
wasn't
should
there?
do is put up Byron Donalds, I think is his name, for speaker, and then tell all the Democrats if you don't vote for him, you're racist. Hey,
Yeah.
it's what they do.
Oh, I
How
got a
dare you
question.
oppose a black man for speaker? All they need is like what, eight, eight to turn.
Oh, I got a question. What if the person who wants to run for Speaker of the House, what if he suffers an injury to his throat and he can't talk anymore? I'll get my coat. Because he can't.
I don't even understand who they're wanting now. Are they just wanting them to put McCarthy back in? I don't even get, because the guy's a complete milk toast.
Mm.
He was not a good speaker at all.
I mean, I don't like the. I mean, I really don't like the Democrats in charge of power, but you got to tell those Republicans, like, guys, you're not helping yourselves, you know. Which, to be fair, only exposes that the Republicans that are actually in power, aren't what a lot of conservatives think they are. You know.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's the problem. There's a lot of conservatives that are like, well, I want Republicans in power because therefore they're actually for the people. And yeah, there are Republicans that are all for the people. The problem is that they're either not elected or they're put in charge of menial positions that don't really do anything. Like assistant to the guy to the secretary or whatever.
Yeah, but I think the populist movement is growing in the Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be remembering these shenanigans next election day.
Yeah. By the way, we were talking about atheists earlier. There's one YouTube atheist who, in my personal opinion, has really fallen far from grace, and that's Telltale Atheist. And he recently did a video on Matt Shea, and he called Matt Shea a domestic terrorist. And I'm like, what did Matt Shea do again? That got him branded that name? And I'm like, he was a supporter of the Bundy standoff, and
Oh.
that's domestic terrorism. How? Hmm.
Well, it is. It's just domestic terrorism by the state.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the BLM Hamas paraglider thing is.
Mm.
But if it has to do with Hamas and Israel, I immediately disbelieve it.
Mm. Going back to the Bundy thing, like, I don't get why people, it only exposes, what I feel about some of those YouTube status, because they always claim it's like, well, we're just against, oppression. It's like, no, you're okay with oppression as long as it's against people you don't like. It reminds me of this one YouTube clip I saw where controversial anti-gay Baptist minister Stephen Anderson, he got pulled over. He got pulled over by the border patrol, and he refused to give them his ID because, to be frankly, he had every right to do so. And it ended up with the border patrol breaking his windows down and tasing him and beating him up. And there were literally people in the comments full of atheists saying, "Yeah, beat him up, beat him up." And I'm just thinking, oh yeah, it's all fun and games until the border patrol starts beating you up. Yeah, then it's an infringement on our liberty. Well, you didn't say that when Steven Anderson was getting his ass whipped. Remember that old poem about the Nazis? By the time once they come for you, there's no one left to defend you. So
Yep. Yeah, Merchant, they've got the system rigged. It's not gonna.
yeah,
They're gonna have to make a lot of changes before the.
yeah.
And
Honestly,
we're seeing more and more how the system is rigged with each election.
mm. Honestly, Mr. Merchant, even if by some miracle a Libertarian Party candidate does win an election, they're probably just going to make up some excuse for why he's not valid. I know they kind of sort of did that with Ron Paul, when he was when he almost became the Republican nominee. The Republican Party, who didn't like him, made up all these rules, and they said, oh no, he can't run because he didn't get this and that.
Well, because he didn't get enough votes, but then they refused to count his votes, the votes
Yeah,
for him.
yeah. Man, speaking of voting, it's like, and I've seen
And there
states,
was like
and I've seen.
this move to like suspend the rules, and a similar thing happened with the Democrats like 2 years later, 4 years later, or whatever it was. But they were trying to suspend the rules just to nominate Romney or whoever it was, um, to just to bypass all of that. And you need like a 2/3 to suspend the rules. And the guy was just reading from the prompter, and you could see on the prompter it was like, okay, all of those, in favor, aye. All those in favor, no. And there was definitely more people saying no. And on the prompter it said the ayes have it. And the guy just kind of stopped for a minute, like not knowing what to do, and then he just read from the prompter, the ayes have it, when they clearly didn't.
Mm.
They didn't even have a majority, let alone 2/3. Then, like I said, the Democrats turned around and did the same thing. So.
Oh yeah, it's that old paradox. It's like why are Republicans filibustering and doing all this stuff, to gain power to block our goals? Who's the idiot that said they could do that? You guys were when you approved of those laws 10 years ago. Yeah.
That's just it. I mean, you can lobby, get people elected. We've seen this in our state house too. Get people elected and push something and get it through and get it put on the agenda. And then, like if it's third on the agenda, the speaker goes, okay, first on the agenda, second on the agenda, third on the agenda. And then fifth on the agenda is, and he skips over fourth. He doesn't say fourth or fifth or whatever. So it's in, but he just skips over that part of the agenda and goes on, and just
Mm,
doesn't let it come before the
mm,
legislature. They do that
mm.
crap
I
all
think
the
I think
time.
I think I think I've said this before. If I ever became president, I know the perfect, I only have one answer for why I did approve that bill. It was too long. Yeah. It's like why did President Hangartner veto our new bill? Bill, what was his statement? I'll read. Teal deer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just veto it for being more than one subject.
Yeah. It's like okay, it's like they're gonna ask me for a fine detail. It's like, well, the thing is, I read some of it, and there's some things I have an issue. So this is called the Save the Babies Act, right? Yeah. Okay. There's a clause in here that says you want $100,000 to be donated to the nephew of a deceased, representative from Nebraska. What does that have to do? What does that have to do with saving the babies? Well, you see, and right here it says you want the Department of Agriculture to import 100 kilotons of queso cheese from Mexico. What does that have to do with saving the babies? Well, you see, Mr. President.
I hope you people know, Checkmate, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Hmm,
Keep saying, what are your thoughts on this person I've never heard of before?
hmm,
I just hope we get out of the Biden administration with our freedom of speech intact.
hmm. Well, that's what happens when you surrender your Second Amendment. That's why the Second Amendment is so important, because many people have pointed out, when you really think about it, the Second Amendment is the most important of all of them, because if you have no means to stand up for it, none of your rights mean shit. You know,
Well, fortunately, with the Second Amendment, things seem to be getting a bit better,
yeah,
but it's going downhill on the first.
it's one amendment that gets overlooked, but I think it's a very important. But I think the government is the government is taking advantage of the fact that not a lot of people care about it. It's the Third Amendment,
Has there
because
ever been a
when you
violation of the Third Amendment?
I think there is, but a lot of people feel, but a lot of people are ignoring it because they try to use the excuse. It's like, oh well, these are all about housing and quartering troops. It's like, yeah, well, how's that different from the FBI saying, yeah, we suspect your neighbor is selling drugs, so we're gonna seize your house and use it as a stakeout. Yeah, it's the dumbest thing I've heard about people that make fun of the Third Amendment. They're like, this makes no sense because if America ever gets invaded, what's going to stop the invading army, from housing and quartering troops? And it's like the Third Amendment was never about foreign troops. It was about government troops. It's because
Yep.
people fail to realize the troops the British were sending. And again, they weren't people. They weren't soldiers from England. They were local pro British militiamen.
From the state
They weren't.
militias, yeah.
Yeah, they were British colonial forces who were native of that area, and they had that rule that said if the colonial territory demands you surrender, you house and quarter and feed the troops, you better do so. So many people are like, well, that's a pointless amendment. Let's just get rid of it. Well, if we get rid of that, then if the United States Army decides, hey, Mr. Killian, we think your house will be a good base. We're gonna take it from you. Hmm. Or if another thing too is that if a U.S. troop, like if he gets lost and he comes up to your house and he says, "Hey, I took the wrong bus and I'm away from my base. Can I use your phone?" And you tell him to buzz off, you'll be a criminal. You could be charged with criminal activity. I mean, it's kind of a dick move to say, but it shouldn't be illegal. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we get rid of the
Oh,
Third Amendment,
you
yeah, if
should
you
be able
tell,
to say all of these, but that's exactly what they're taking away.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Whereas if the Third
They're
Amendment was
they're
taken away, like
basically
if,
trying to bring back the Alien and Sedition Acts.
yeah. And actually, I think the reason why the U.S. government abuses the Third Amendment is because, like I said, it's because people don't talk about it a whole lot. Because, in all honesty, I see scenarios that do sound like violations of the Third Amendment, but of course, the government will say, "Oh, well, these aren't troops. They're police officers." You
Well,
know,
that was the same thing when the Third Amendment was passed.
yeah. I mean, that's probably what they would say anyway. They'd say, "Oh, the Third Amendment only applies to military personnel," but these aren't military personnel. These are federal agents from the FBI. Right. Well, people know about the 10th Amendment. I think the problem with the 10th Amendment is not that people don't know about it, it's that they misread it. Like, because the 10th Amendment is used by a lot of oppressive, state governments to say, oh, it says, we can do what we want as long as the Constitution doesn't say we can't do it. It's like, no, that's only if the powers are delegated. And also, it flat out says if there's nothing in the Constitution, you got to look in what your Constitution says. And if it's not there, then it's up to the people.
Yep.
A state government can't just say we can do this because there's nothing against it in the Constitution. That's how they get away with a lot of these bullshit gun rules. Which, by the way, people, when you really think, which, by the way, people, all gun laws are unconstitutional because, contrary to popular belief, the Second Amendment doesn't say guns can't be banned. It says the right shall not be infringed. And I
Yeah, I
looked
mean,
up the old.
infringed. If they pass a law saying you have to stand on your left foot when you buy the gun, that's an infringement.
Yep. And I looked at an old school infringement because, like you said in your old video you have to interpret the Constitution as they were kind of understood at the time. Now, that doesn't mean original intent. It just means as they were understood. And infringement meant the same thing. It didn't mean an outright ban. It meant, any form of, barment.
Yeah. Any little restriction was an infringement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was none of this balancing the rights with the interest of the government or anything like that,
Oh, yeah.
like they do now.
Yeah. And this kind of relates to the Social Security thing I brought up. They can't do the whole, well, you can't sue us unless we say we can be sued. I forgot what the term they used was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be right back. I gotta use the bathroom.
Yeah, right. Shall not be infringed unless it's scary looking. Well, that's what the judge was pointing out in the case, is because it's just about looks. Because California was permitting guns that were functionally equivalent, but just looked differently. But I mean, it didn't even matter. Even the laws about violating automatic weapons, that's a violation of the Second Amendment. All of it is. And they're all like, "Oh no, the people shouldn't be allowed to have weapons of war." It's like that was exactly the idea of the Second Amendment. The people should be allowed to have weapons of war. Yeah, because the interests of the government are completely noble. Yeah, everyone knows where that originated, right? That was the executive order that created the Japanese internment camps, and the Supreme Court allowed that, saying, "Well, there's a compelling governmental interest," or whatever the phrase is. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's near impossible to buy an automatic rifle. Oh, but the AR-15 is fully semi-automatic. Or like that woman, I think she was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and she was talking about barrel shrouds and why they should be banned. And he was like, "Well, what is a barrel shroud?" And she couldn't answer. "Oh, isn't that the one that goes up at the end?" It's like, what? No, it's a safety feature. They're banning safety features. Oh, and a vertical forward grip, that's bad too. Even though it makes the gun easier to hold for people who don't have full range of motion. Colt 45 is fully single action. I can never get a straight answer as to whether or not double action revolvers count as semi-automatic with these bans. I mean, really, with the way a lot of them are phrased, we're just left with single shot derringers. The basic thing I think everyone needs to remember about the Bill of Rights is that every single bit of it is to be used against the government.
And back,
That's
sorry.
Welcome back. But that's what it's all about. Every single thing in the Bill of Rights is about opposing the government.
By the way, speaking of the Second Amendment, going back to the whole thing about the Second Amendment being about hunting, you know what's ironic about that is because, and this is something only gun experts would truly understand, is that when people fail to realize is that smoothbore muskets used by militaries at the time, like the Charleville or the Brombess musket, they were terrible hunting weapons. You know,
Yeah.
they didn't have good sights. They were smoothbore, so the ball didn't spin. They were designed for warfare. In fact, the reason why they didn't have rifled barrels was because at the time, rifled barrels took forever to reload, and a smoothbore cut down on the reload time. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, oh, the AR-15 is a weapon of war. Well, so are knives.
Well, like I said, when
You
you
know,
were gone, though, the whole point of the Second Amendment is that people can have weapons of war.
yeah, you know.
A well-regulated militia, in other words, a militia armed body of the people that happens regularly, because that's what the word meant. Make it regular to have armed citizens. That's what regulate meant back then.
Yeah. And another thing too, and you pointed this out, the whole line of a well-regulated militia, it's not meant, it wasn't put in there to say who can own the guns. Rather, it was invented to explain why we needed guns.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was the reasoning behind it, not any kind of
Yeah.
restriction.
Yeah, because one issue the colonies had when they first went up against the British was because at the time they didn't have a standardized issued arms, and a lot of the militia members were showing up with rifles, which while they were accurate and powerful, they were unfit for the battlefield, and they actually compromised the British and our war against the British, and we needed smoothbore muskets, and literally the British were trying to go after muskets. Like, if I recall correctly, there were British commanders that were given policies: if you see any smoothbore muskets, you are to either to capture them and seize them, and if you can't take them, you have to destroy them. I mean, if I recall correctly, that's what the Battle of Bunker Hill was. It was basically the British trying to take away the main arms manufacturer for the American colonies.
Whoever argues that is implying the government has special rights because they can have weapons, but we can't. Yeah, and the whole point was we should be able to have whatever weapons the government does.
Yep. Yeah, the government has special rights. So basically, you're saying the government has divine rights. Yep, the old divine right of kings.
Every weapon was a weapon of war. Yeah, handguns are used in war. Knives are used in war. Hands and fists are used in war.
I mean, yeah, they do teach infantry, basic martial arts. Like, maybe not enough to turn you into a weapon, but enough to know that,
Enough that if it comes down to it, you can fight in close quarters like that.
Yeah, yeah. And not to mention, a lot of people fail to realize this, like, there's this big misconception that the only weapons they had back during the Revolutionary War were muskets, and to a lesser extent cannons. It's like, no, they had rockets, they had bombs, they had grenades.
They had cannons.
Yeah.
And James Madison confirmed, yeah, the Second Amendment means you can own cannons.
Yeah, yeah. If I recall correctly, there was that shipping merchant, I think
he was worried about pirates, and he wanted to know if he could have cannons on his ship to defend against pirates.
Yeah, and Madison said, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, that's another thing too that people who try to say it only applies to muskets also fail to realize is that it doesn't say musket, it says arms.
Yep.
That's why people say, well, if you're saying we should interpret the Constitution as they were understood at the time, then therefore for only muskets were allowed. It's like, no, it says arms, meaning any form of weapon. Like, look, yes, they didn't have automatic weapons, back in those times. But I'm pretty sure if you traveled back in those times and you told them that there'd be automatic weapons in the future, they're not stupid in saying, what? That's impossible. They would have been like, I could see that, yeah.
Well, actually, there were automatic weapons.
Yeah.
They weren't used because they were expensive to make, but I forget which one it was, but someone had actually made an automatic weapon. And the problem is, at the time, guns had to be handmade, so they were expensive, but Congress was interested in, they were saying, okay, how long, would it take for you to give us, so many guns, and how expensive would it be? And it was just such a slow rate of production, and they were so expensive that Congress said, yeah, okay, we can't really afford that. But they didn't say, oh, no, you're not allowed to have that under the Second Amendment. Nope.
Yeah, yeah, there were repeating firearms, heck, there's actual examples, like, Forgotten Firearms has a few videos on them. There's videos of, like, early repeating firearms, going back, to the arquebus era when guns were were fired from a lighted match, and the only reason why they were never accepted was, like you said, they were expensive and they were a pain in the ass to operate.
Yeah, it wasn't
But
really until you had, modern manufacturing processes that they were able to make them,
yeah,
with any kind of regularity and efficiency.
yeah, not the pickle gun Muppets, a puckle gun.
Puckle, yeah.
Yeah. Fun thing about that gun, it actually was chambered to fire two different types of ammunition. Yep, for Christian nations that you're fighting, like if England was fighting France or Germany you were to fire traditional bullets. But if you were fighting things like Ottomans, Muslims, pagans, or non Christians, you were to use square bullets. Yeah, apparently because he thought that square bullets were more painful, and thus because they weren't Christians, they deserved a more painful death. Although there's still an uncertainty if it could actually fire them.
I mean, there were reports of repeating rifles going back to like the 1400s or something.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a new idea.
I mean, heck, weapons that could fire more than one shot. They've been around, since firearms were first used. Like, there's pictures of ancient Chinese warriors using them. They're basically miniature cannons on a stick, and they would sometimes have 2 or 3 barrels, and basically they would fire one barrel, rotate it, then fire it again. They existed. I mean, heck, there's repeating crossbows that have existed during the medieval period. They could do the same thing with guns.
Yeah, I mean, a repeating gun will be easier than a repeating crossbow.
Yeah.
Because of the mechanism, you have to cock the bow back.
Oh yeah. I mean,
There's been videos of people trying to make them today, like with modern tools and materials, and even they have difficulty doing it.
hmm. So can citizens own nukes? Well, the thing is, people always say, "Well, if we allow unrestricted weapons rule, what's going to stop citizens from creating their own nukes?" It's like, to which I have to ask, why do you want your own nuclear weapon?
That's another one of those questions that says more about the person asking it.
Yeah. I will say this though: there have been people that have gotten in trouble and being labeled as nuclear terrorists simply because, like, they don't even want to make a working nuke; they just want to make like a diagram for like a science project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember reading back in the day of one kid being expelled for that.
Yeah, like, wasn't there a kid, who almost got expelled because he drew a diagram? He drew a diagram of a nuclear bomb, and now, granted, it was made out of paper, but had he made it out of the materials, it would have worked. And he simply did it for a science project, and he almost got expelled for it.
If I
And he
remember
was,
correctly, he made a demonstration of the technique using the radioactive material from a smoke detector.
hmm,
And all it was just like this thing that would light up a light just to verify
hmm,
that it happened.
yeah.
But they said he was building a nuke, and
I know there was a Boy Scout whose life was ruined because he did something like that.
the fact of the matter is there's not going to be any real incentive to own nukes given how expensive and difficult they are to make, considering that with the same material you can much more efficiently make a nuclear reactor and have free power for life.
I mean, that's why, despite all the fear mongering, many people, I've heard some people within the military community that says, "Well, we don't want World War 3, contrary to what some people are saying, if it does unfortunately occur, it's probably not going to go nuclear just because the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, maybe 60, 70 years ago, nukes kind of had a purpose. Today, there is no practical utility for them other than just saying fuck you, if you're going to take over my country, then I'm going to nuke it so you can't have it.
Yeah.
Because people fail to realize, contrary to what apocalypse movies portray, it's not like you push a button and then all these nuclear weapons are flying everywhere. It actually is a bit more complicated than that. And with modern day technology, most of those ICBMs can actually be easily intercepted. People fail to realize most ICBMs, they're not for strike capabilities. They're actually meant to be defensive. Like if a mass army is invading the nation and they have no choice but to nuke their own nation to destroy the army. So can citizens own cruise missiles? Well, depends on what you define as a cruise missile, because if I take a small explosive on it and I attach it to a remote guided rocket, even if it's tiny and will barely do any damage, that's technically a cruise missile. And not to mention, it's the same thing with the nukes. It's like, some of those really big artillery pieces, like those cruise missiles in the Moab, it's like, I mean, yeah, it's nice to watch videos of them go off, but at the end of the day, what's a civilian gonna do with a bomb?
Yeah, they don't really have a defensive purpose.
Yeah, most people that own guns, they're owning guns because they want personal protection of their property. It's like, yeah, in some circumstances, an explosive, weapon, would come in handy, but for the average person, no.
Well, and if you do have some insane person who wants to build a nuke because they want to threaten everyone so they can take over, as soon as they find out what he's up to,
Oh yeah,
they're not
they're
they're
gonna
going to
be
retaliate.
yeah, they're gonna storm his house, and hmm,
That's the problem with all of those scenarios is, the idea of, oh, well, you'll just hire up a bunch of mercenaries and take over everything. You would have to do it in a way that no one discovers what you're up to. And especially when it's something like recruiting an army, how do you recruit in secret?
yeah. Take it is incredibly sensitive. But I still think the Second Amendment covers it. Yes, but again, it's the same thing with cruise missiles.
From a practical standpoint, who is really going to have one?
Yeah. I mean, an armored personnel carrier, absolutely. I could see practical defensive utility for a property owner, but a tank, especially because the thing is, a tank is supposed to support infantry. It's not meant to be a defensive weapon. It's meant to be an offensive weapon designed to work alongside infantry. That's not to say you can't use a tank defensively, but that's not its point. But that's not really
I mean,
its
it's
design
one of those
feature.
things that if you think about it, it's kind of silly for it to exist outside the concept of, a state running a military to overrun another state.
Yeah.
It's just not a factor.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's not cost. That's the limiting factor. It's the whole It's really the practical utility. I mean, it's the same thing with machine guns. Now this isn't a reason to ban them or to get rid of them, but most people that own machine guns, they don't own them for personal protection. They own them because it's fun to go out in the middle of the desert and fire off 100 rounds or so on a target.
Well, and there's also all the difference in the world between, adding an auto seer to an AR-15 and having a full blown minigun.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing too that people fail to realize. An M16 is not a machine gun; it's an assault rifle. A machine gun is, generally speaking, it's meant to be a heavy weapon, and its whole purpose is to deliver high volume of fire. Forgotten Weapons did a pretty good video on that, where it's talking about the different categories of machine guns and what's the difference between a submachine gun, automatic rifle, light machine gun, general purpose machine gun, medium machine gun, and heavy machine gun. Mm.
I mean, usually machine guns aren't even something that you pick up and use. They're sitting on some sort of a tripod or other
Yeah,
platform or in a turret or
they're
something.
even the ones where you only need 2 or 3 people to operate them, they're still considered crew served weapons, meaning that they're best utilized when you've got at least another person with you to help them. Because anyone who's served in the military can tell you that while you can do it, it's not practical to pick up an M60 or an M240 and go all Rambo. It's not how a machine gun's supposed to be used. Fun fact. When the Thompson submachine gun was first made, it actually was not a success, and the reason why was not because it was a bad weapon. It was a great weapon. The problem was just people were like, "Well, it's a great weapon, but what are we going to use it for?" That was the problem. It was what the heck are we going to use it for? If a gun, yeah, that carries 50 rounds and fires 800 rounds a minute. Yeah, that's good on a battlefield, but I'm just trying to protect my ranch from the occasional hustler.
Well, and apparently the drum had a tendency to jam, and there were a lot of other issues with it.
Oh yeah, it was.
Although
Yeah,
there
the
is a
problem.
picture going around, apparently someone fired a Tommy gun at the doors of a Cybertruck and showed that it was bulletproof.
Hmm. Yeah, the problem with the Tommy gun was that yes, it was a great gun, and it was a pretty good weapon, and while in theory it would have made a pretty darn good home defense weapon. The problem was that a lot of people were just like, well, it's a nice gun, but it's complicated, and
Yeah, and it had a lot of mechanical issues and stuff that
yeah,
could go wrong.
not to mention it was expensive. It cost $200, and a lot of people are saying, "Wow, $200 for a gun." This was the 1920s, people. Back then, $200 was like $1,000.
No more than that.
Yeah, yeah, at the time, for the price of one Tommy gun, you could buy like two or three. You could buy 2 or 3 Colt government automatics.
Let's see, $200 in 1920. That's just under 3,000 in today's money.
Yeah. Yeah, it was designed. It was designed for the trenches of World War One, but World War One ended before it could arrive. Then Thompson tried selling it on the commercial market, but most people, like I said, they weren't interested in it because it was just too expensive. It wasn't. It was complicated, and finally he was able to make some money selling it to police departments.
It just
And it
wasn't
wasn't
used
until
that much, but it had this nice distinctive look that they put in movies, and so that kind of entered
yeah,
the public imagination.
it wasn't until the Because now I've never fired a Thompson, but I have handled one. And one thing that a lot of movies and video games don't demonstrate in a lot of people, and this is why some people are like, why wasn't the Thompson used by everyone? It's like if you actually hold one, they are ridiculously heavy.
Yeah.
Like the one I held wasn't even loaded. It was a semi-automatic, reproduction, that you can use for plucking, and it was heavy as AF. It was heavy. Fun fact about guns, that's another thing a lot of people fail to realize about old flintlock muskets is that they are extremely heavy.
Oh man, if you ever
Like so,
held one of those old 38 police specials,
yeah,
and they were heavy.
yeah.
They were just a chunk.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I've handled a reproduction, smoothbore musket because there's a thing called muzzle loading hunting where because muzzles are still made for hunting purposes because there's special seasons for them and some companies that make muzzle loading rifles they make them in the style of the old flintlock pistols just for fancy sakes, and I've handled one of those. They are heavy.
Well, that's something that surprises a lot of people. I mean, like even with a modern semi-auto or something, they're surprised by how heavy it is, especially in the barrel. But I mean, that's nothing compared to the ones they were making 100 years ago.
Oh yeah, you know.
Whereas, ironically, shotguns aren't all that heavy.
Yeah, until you fire them. You
Well,
know.
yeah, they got a lot of power behind them. But I mean,
Yeah.
just picking them up and pointing them, they're not that heavy. Heavy can be good though because it means the recoil doesn't move the barrel as much.
Yeah. Sorry, my mom's in here. She's collecting some dishes.
Mm.
My room's a disaster. I gotta clean it. Yeah. Yeah, before you ask, I'm not a hoarder. I'm just one of those people where I have a really bad habit of I don't pick up after myself.
Yeah, you just don't have a lot of room.
Yeah. Hey. Come on, fourth fruit. When are you getting here?
Save us from ourselves.
Yeah,
This
it's
was
getting
supposed to be a night
boring.
where more people could join.
Yeah. Yeah, I contacted Executioner and he said he wanted to join, but unfortunately he's got family over, so
Uh,
he said he'll be with us in spirit.
I wondered if Saturday night might backfire on us. People
Yeah.
with things to do.
Yeah.
I still
You know,
don't
Shane's
really
thinking of
know what the. Someone leave a comment or something and just let me know what's the best night to do these.
yeah.
Or even if we could do them during the day sometime.
Well, yeah, I know, because Tim, he's the DM of my Dungeons and Dragons group, and he has to hold it Thursdays, which is a pain in the butt because most jobs require you to work all day and work through the entire week, and you get the weekend off. And I'm like, really, Thursdays? Like, yeah, surprisingly, that was the only day that works. Surprisingly,
The
but then
problem with
again,
him always was he's West Coast, so he's 3 hours behind me.
yeah. Although going back to the scheduling thing, if I recall correctly, he does work at a restaurant, so it makes sense why weekends would be unavailable because.
Yeah.
Yeah. Surprisingly, you know what? Surprisingly, my job, which is working at dog daycare, it surprisingly gets real busy during the weekend, and that always shocked me because I'm like, if anything, it would be during the weekdays when it would be busy because everyone's at work and they can't take care of their dogs. Because don't get me wrong, dog boarding services, they are important and they are an important goods or service, but in my personal opinion, if you're relying on them, you probably shouldn't be owning a dog.
Well,
You
I
know,
mean, everyone needs to go on vacation or whatever, leave for a few
yeah.
weeks.
Well, I know that. I'm just saying, like, we have people that board their dogs like pretty much every other day, and I'm like, people, I understand, boarding them every once in a while for our vacation when you just can't bring them, but
Yeah,
especially if it's a
why would
dog,
you regularly board them?
yeah, especially if it's a dog breed like a husky or a German shepherd, which needs constant, stimulation and exercise.
Yeah, I remember Sundays being dead for this too.
Mm.
We've actually
Yeah,
had a bit more chat activity tonight.
yeah. Well, the Pagosity podcast is done during Saturday.
I mean, I could pretty at this point, I have it pretty much done by noonish on Saturdays for the supporters, so I could upload it earlier on Sundays. But
Mm.
as I recall, when we've tried doing this on Sunday nights, it's just been dead.
Yep.
We've had more luck, I think, with Thursdays, oddly.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
been a
What is
while
fourth?
since it's been really active, jumping.
Yeah. Yeah, what does fourth root do for work again? I forgot.
Oh, I don't remember.
Hmm. Something science related. Because when he is on here, that's all he does is you and him talk for several hours about theoretical physics.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. And before you ask me, no, I don't know what theoretical physics are, but I do have a theoretical degree in physics.
Theoretically, I know physics.
Hmm.
I always
Unless
thought the
they,
term theoretical physics was kind of weird because the whole point of physics is it's theoretical.
hmm,
And I mean, yes, you can apply the theory, but that's true with every theory.
yeah. Like I've seen some people ask, it's like, well, why are scientific facts, addressed as theories instead of not facts? And I've heard some scientists say because the fact of the matter is, and this is something we acknowledge, our knowledge of the universe is still limited, and we will never know absolutely every single little detail.
Well, and also people
But
don't really understand what science means by the word theory. It's just it's a model for
yeah,
how you're going to do things.
yeah,
And it lets you make testable predictions, it lets you apply it in the real
yeah,
world, stuff like that.
yeah. And again, the reason why the model's called a theory, not a fact, is like I said, is because there are still some factors that we know they occur. We just don't know precisely what they are.
Well, and a fact, again, this is the way science uses it. A fact is just an observation that's universally persistent.
Yeah,
And theories are made up of facts.
yeah,
You collect the facts together, you try and make laws, which are mathematical relationships between facts,
yeah,
and you kind of bundle all that up into a theory.
yeah.
Theory is as
I
good as it gets in science. There's no only a theory. That's as good as it gets.
yeah. And I will say this, and this kind of relates to the religion thing and all that, is like the thing I hate the most is when people try to ask, like why does this happen, and like is a purpose. Like when they talk about, like, let's say for example, if you're talking about magnetism, they're like, well, why are things magnetic? Well, what's the purpose of there being magnetism? It's like, well, there is no purpose. That's
Yeah.
just how it is.
Oddly enough, the better question is why are so many things not magnetic?
Yeah. I think you brought that up. Yeah, the actual question shouldn't be, why does this thing do that? The question you should be asking is why can't other things be like that?
Yeah, because when you kind of look at it, everything's held together by electromagnetism. Well,
Yeah.
why wouldn't everything be a magnet? And that's
Yeah.
actually a complicated question to answer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like people asking you, why are you wearing white pants after Labor Day? I don't know, why aren't you?
Isn't it always after Labor Day?
Yeah. I don't get where that joke came from anyway, either. I don't
It's
know
a
why.
fashion thing. You're not supposed to wear white after Labor Day.
Yeah.
Don't ask me about this stuff.
But that's the important question is, why aren't you? There's you know, I mean, this kind of goes to the thing, that's the reason why the burden of proof is on the accuser, not the accused, because there's hundreds of things you could be doing that you're not doing. Why do you have to account for every single one of them? Like why am I on the computer talking to you instead of sitting at my desk and watching TV or YouTube? Well, I shouldn't have to explain that. I just because to be fair, I don't even have an answer. I just don't feel like it.
Yeah.
How come that's not considered a valid answer? It's like, why aren't you watching TV? Why are you talking to Shane instead of watching TV? Because there's nothing on TV. That actually does remind me. What happens if you have one of those kids where they keep asking you why? Like when you explain them scientifically, they ask, "Well, why does it do that?" People ask, "What's the best thing to respond to them?" Like when you explain everything, what's the best way to respond to that?
You gotta just try to boil it down.
Yeah.
Alina was 5 years old when she asked me, why it looks like the moon's chasing us around. And I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to explain parallax to a 5-year-old?
Yeah.
I did my best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. That's the whole thing. When people are saying about having the talk, the reason why they always say you should wait until they're in their teens, to have the talk with them. It's not because they'll be traumatized by the truth of where babies come from. It's because they won't get it.
Well, and
Or the,
in my experience, there wasn't any really one time for the talk. They would just kind of slowly increase their curiosity as they go, and you just kind of,
yeah,
explain to them at whatever level they're ready for.
yeah. Just raise them. Just send them to your uncle's farm. Yeah, they'll learn. They'll learn the. They'll learn the birds and the bees there. Mm. Oh, so mommy and daddy had me because daddy took a syringe and shoved it inside mommy. Yeah,
Yeah, that's about how it is.
yeah.
Hello, Sid.
Mm.
What are you doing down there instead of in here talking with us?
And yes, I did witness that as a kid when I was on my grandpa's farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people jokingly say, "Yeah, just send them to the farm." That way you could that because it's a lot easier to explain it with animals rather than people. I mean, heck, it was my grandpa that explained where babies come from, not my mom or dad.
Yeah,
Granted,
and talking
he
about the birthing process. So, at what point do you shove your arm in up to the elbow?
mm,
Because that's what you have to do a lot of times with,
yep,
cows to make sure the calf isn't breached.
yep. Oh yeah, I watched Bondi Vet. Yep, yep. And I've seen a cow give birth, and yep, it's messy.
Peter Davison, he played the Fifth Doctor. Before he was the Fifth Doctor, he was Tristan on All Creatures Great and Small, where they were doing that. And after he stopped playing the Doctor, they were doing another. I don't know if it was a made-for-TV movie or what, but they were doing another All Creatures Great and Small. And one of the scenes, kind of typical in this, where the actors would actually do it, shove their hands, up a cow's vagina, and he was like, I could still be playing the Doctor. Why did I give that up for this?
Yep.
Can I be
Oh
Doctor
yeah.
Number 7?
Yep. I've seen YouTube videos and old videos of veterinarian vet, of agricultural vets, and yep, they say it's nothing like yeah, it's nothing like people think it is.
From what I understand, that show was actually pretty realistic about it.
Mm,
They actually consulted with a lot of farm animal vets.
mm.
'Cause that's what the show was. That's what they were. They were veterinarians.
I mean, probably one really funny comment. One really funny comment as I was watching like one of those AMA videos, cultural vet that says, where people are worried when you're artificially inseminating a heifer. Are you worried about getting pooped on? And they're like, that is the least of my worries. Yeah, because listen, I have PPE. I can wear that while I'm doing the deed. I can wear that while I'm doing the deed. So if she poops or pees on me, that's fine. What I'm more worried about is if she kicks me or sits on me,
Oh yeah.
because there's not much I can do about that. If she decides she doesn't want me back there and she decides to sit down, my arm's gone. My arm's broken. He says it's even worse with horses because horses are a little bit more. Some of them can be a little bit more spirited than cows.
It all depends. Cows can be mean.
Oh yeah, especially bulls.
Bulls generally, they only get riled up when they feel threatened or they think you're threatening the herd, but cows can just go off for no reason.
Oh yeah, especially especially when one of them's in heat.
Hello, Sid.
Mm,
I can barely hear you, Sid.
mm, mm. I mean,
Maybe I
you
can
know
turn
all
it
about.
up from my end. Hang on.
I mean, you know all about this, Shane, because you've mentioned, when you were a kid, you were briefly raised on the family farm.
Try it again, Sid.
Yep. Hello.
I mean, I've got you louder, but you're kind of breaking up.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's. I don't know if it's noisy or if there's like a lot of like interference.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Do you have the right microphone selected?
Huh? Hold on, let me check.
So while Sid's working on this, Shane, you mentioned you grew up on the family farm. Did that mean you had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning?
No, it wasn't anything like that.
Yeah.
When I came along, it was mostly. It was mostly there were the cows, and we were baling hay and working on the
Yep.
sawmill.
Yep.
Is it better now?
That is not better. I have no idea what that interference is.
Sounds like someone strumming an electric guitar.
Okay, that's weird.
I don't even know what that sounds like.
All right, hold on. We'll drop out for a second and come back in.
Sounds like a DJ whose turntables are jammed. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really work on a farm because I mostly just visited my farms, my extended family's farms. But yeah, the most farm work I ever did was my uncle had dairy cows, and when they were inside, to be milked, he'd let me pick up some hands and feed some of them.
Okay, is it now? Is it better?
It is much better, but I need to turn down again. Hang on.
Yeah.
Now try it.
There we go.
Yeah, that's sounding better. I just got to dial in your volume.
So yeah, I was busy today with the college stuff, but I guess I can say like the last 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, we were just talking about farm stuff.
Executioner flaked out, and it doesn't look like Fourth Root's going to make it, so.
Yeah.
So, I guess something I've been meaning to ask you is, Argentina could possibly have a libertarian as their next president. Possibly this, or when is the election happening?
I don't really know anything about it.
Okay, so the first round is tomorrow. And the second round is in November. Oh, I don't know. It's interesting, I guess. I mean, they've had like triple-digit inflation for a while, so
Oh, yeah,
it's
they've
no
been
wonder.
really bad about it. It was like, yeah, because for a while, Venezuela was getting all of the, because 10,000% inflation of whatever they had. But yeah, a lot of
It
other,
was even higher than that.
a lot of other countries have been having high inflation too. They just didn't get the attention.
I mean, I guess every country needs libertarianism to an extent, but I mean, I guess because Argentina is in such a dire state.
Well, they've been in
It's,
a dire state for over 20 years.
Yeah.
Between
I
the
guess,
inflation and the capital flight and all of their monetary monkeying around.
this isn't Argentina, but it applies to Chile because I mean I know Chile was briefly kind of sort of libertarian in the 90s and 2000s, and then for whatever reason people were like, yeah, we want social stuff back, we want all this free stuff back, and now they're on the downward spiral again.
Yep.
And they elected a socialist as president who
Yeah.
has a low approval rating.
That is one genuine criticism of libertarianism. It's not the ideology. It's how do we prevent people, from getting too comfortable with life that they start thinking that they start becoming entitled, and then all it takes is a charismatic person to say you put me in power and I'll give you everything you want, but at the cost of your liberty.
You just don't let that kind of power structure be in place to begin with.
Mm. Well, the problem is that, because I have heard one common criticism is that, if people become, if their needs get taken care of for the most part, they're going to start becoming, more bored, and they're going to be like, and they're going to start complaining about, minor stuff, and there'll be much more easier to manipulate into wanting that system back.
But I mean, what you're talking about is, electing someone into an already existing system. Whereas convincing people to actually create that system to begin with is very complicated.
Because I know, Fyodor Dostoevsky did a book about that, where he said the biggest problem he had with, because contrary to popular belief, he was not against the Enlightenment era, the Enlightenment ideas and all that. What he was criticizing was the mentality that, if we would just adopt, these Enlightenment policies, we'd all be happy and free. It's like, no, you wouldn't. You'd be complaining that you weren't invited to the right party, or that the food you had wasn't good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, de Tocqueville noticed the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that is a genuine issue, but
I mean, just as a thought experiment, imagine if no government had ever existed and people were sitting around like that, and you came up with them and said, say, I've got an idea, and you described a government to them. Imagine that they would think you were the craziest person on the planet.
Or they would all agree with you, but then you'd all kill each other because you can't decide who's going to lead the government.
How would they agree with you? Hey, let's have a small group of people be able to go around and bust into everyone's home and enforce their will, and we'll say it's okay because every 4 years you get to print a name on a ballot.
Well, like I said, some people would probably agree, but then you'd have infighting because they're going to be like, yeah, but I'll lead the government because I know what to do. No, I know what's better. I want to do it.
Would it have been like that when the first governments did form, all the way back then?
Well, I mean, it wasn't really like, you just had those initial city-states starting up, and they were the result of, manipulating and angering people with religion.
Well, and the earliest governments didn't even have the option of a ballot every 4 years because the first ones were monarchies and dictatorships.
Yeah. You just had someone who said, I'm in charge because God says so, basically.
And then their son's in charge. And then their kids in charge, etc., etc.
Tim did a really good video one time that said that, in a way speaking, governments could exist in an anarchist society. It's more of the state we're against, because like if people set up like their own little, group of people, that everyone agrees, can be in charge, like, with limited power, that could work. The issue we have is a state, because a state is a government that declares we have some degree of sovereign rule, so you all have to say what we want. Whether you agree
and also
or not.
nowadays, if you had that kind of system, everyone would be armed. So if you tried to impose it, you'd have all these people going, oh, hell no.
Yeah. Because, I mean, to be fair, one of the reasons why states existed for so many centuries was because for a long time there was no reliable method to practically fight back against the state. I think it's no coincidence that the Enlightenment era came about around the same time when firearms became practical weapons, because they basically neutralized a lot of the historical ways people would oppress you. It's difficult to subjugate a village when they now have a weapon that can punch straight through, your horde of armed knights.
It was basically a combination of firearms and the printing press.
Yeah, you know. Well, yeah, and it's also no secret that some of the first copyright laws came about when the printing press was invented, and hint, it wasn't people printing it; it was the government saying we need to control it.
Yeah, with their special, crony publishers being the only ones who could.
Yeah,
And the writers were all subordinate to them.
yeah. Because that's another thing too that a lot of people, who are pro copyright fail to understand is that people are like, well, we just want to make sure the original artist or writer gets credits. Like copyrights almost never go to the original creator. They almost always go to the publisher. I mean, some companies like Disney flat out say, you have to sign a contract that basically says any character or story you create, it automatically belongs to the Walt Disney Corporation.
Oh yeah, it's a work for hire contract.
Yeah. Yeah, like, regardless if it gets picked up or not. Like if you're a Disney animator and you draw like a comic of, like, I don't know, Spunky the Squirrel, even if it never gets adopted because you created it, on Disney property using Disney's tools, by your contract, it's theirs. Yeah, so I'm sorry, copyright people, but copyright does not protect the people you think it does.
Nope.
And not to mention, the irony is that, if I recall correctly, from strictly historically speaking, a lot of authors, were actually against copyright, and they were all in for, people copying their works, because they understood that's the only way people are going to hear about me. I mean, perfectly good example is Charles Dickens. Initially, he was all for copyright, and he hated the idea that people were copying his books, without his permission, until he discovered just how popular he was in areas where people were pirating his works.
Well, it was also the fact that those were the only areas where he was actually reaching the poor, which was his audience.
Yeah.
Because, in England, where there were strong copyright protections, it was just rich people who had his books.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Charles Dickens, I know that wasn't his intention, but when you really think about it, Scrooge did have some genuine points when he was talking about, helping the poor and all that, because
Well, yeah,
when you really,
Scrooge was not set up initially to be this, dramatically evil person or anything.
yeah,
He was just a cynical guy who'd basically given up on everything. But there was
Yeah.
a lot of self-insertion in there.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the arguments that Scrooge gives about things are things that Dickens had previously unironically argued for in essays.
yeah, because I mean,
Like
Scrooge
the
does have
issues with the workhouses and things like that.
yeah, and I mean, going back to the whole thing, people are like, we're simply asking for a small donation of money to help the poor. I would probably be thinking, well, that's charitable and all that, but how is me throwing you a couple £1,000s going to help anyone? It's like, okay, you're going to buy them, a steak and potato dinner for Christmas Eve. Okay, how's that going to help them in the grand scheme of things? It's that old Chinese saying: you can either give a person a fish or you can teach them how to fish, and throwing money at them is not going to help them.
Well, and that's where George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life actually had the Scrooge role in a more, positive, upbeat way, because, he wasn't a charity giving money to people. It was a building and loan, but that was the reason why people were able to get a house or, get a roof repaired after a storm, ruined it or whatever. People would, invest, and he'd reinvest it in the community.
I will say one scene I do like from an adaptation of A Christmas Carol is in the George Scott version. It's that one version where the ghost of A Christmas Present takes him to a ghetto where he sees some homeless people, and one of the guys is complaining, and he's not and he's telling this to his wife. He's not saying I want the government to give me more stuff. He's saying I want work. That's all he wants. He wants a
Yeah.
job. He doesn't want someone to hand him food or anything. He says, I want to work. These hands have done good work. I want to provide for my family. I mean, that's the reason why a lot of people didn't go to poorhouses, was because it was part of, it was like, because it was kind of seen as like opium. A lot of people, they want to work. Like, I don't know the politics of London at the time, but if I recall correctly, England had, those issues worse than other places, because England actually had some of those social rules in place long before places like America did.
Yeah.
I think, like, some historians have actually pointed that out, that when you think about it, all the places, where we hear about, poor people suffering at the hands, ironically occurred in European nations, which had adopted those social programs that a lot of leftists are saying we need to have to protect the poor. Which does bring up a pretty good point. If Europe, was so ahead progressively in the Industrial Revolution, why were people traveling to North America and not say Germany or France?
Yeah, and that's people really need to read that book more carefully, because when he said deplete the surplus population, he wasn't talking about the poor. He was talking about poor people who didn't want to work.
Yeah.
And they just wanted to lie around all day and receive handouts.
Yeah. And from what I understand, that was a very popular opinion of the day, Like, there were a lot of people even back then saying, look, charity is one thing, but at some point or another, these people have to get up and they have to get a job, Otherwise, they're always going to stay in the ghetto. I will say that's why I like the George Scott version, not just because that's the one I grew up with, because having read the original novel, George Scott's the closest to the actual original Scrooge, because, like, everyone either portrays Scrooge as, like, as like a greedy old man that, orgasms at the sight of money, or they portray him as a grumpy old man saying, yeah, why should I do it? I don't care. I hate Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas George Scott portrays him legitimately like, he's apathetic towards Christmas. Like, as he tells his nephew Fred, he's like, but you don't keep Christmas. He's like, well, then let me leave it alone. Whereas everyone else would portray it's like, oh, I hate Christmas, screw Christmas, screw Christmas. You know what else is ironic? One of the reasons why Scrooge hates Christmas is, believe it or not, it's the reason why a lot of modern socialists hate Christmas, because it's all about money and materialism. It's about buying stuff.
Yeah, he thought Christmas was just, phony. And it was just all about appearance.
Yep.
Which is also how Charlie Brown felt about it.
Yeah, believe it or not, people, like, if I recall correctly in the book, the funny irony is that even though Scrooge is filthy, stinking rich, he doesn't live like a rich guy,
No, he lived in a lumber room.
Yeah. And I mean, although it's never confirmed, it's heavily implied the reason why, if he didn't change, he was going to die, a year after the events of the book, because that's what because if I recall correctly, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come takes him a year into the future. It's heavily implied through the person that took his stuff that the reason why he died was simply because he didn't take care of himself. He was sick, and rather than go to a doctor or get someone to help him, he just stayed in his house and he got worse. I mean,
I don't think the book actually gives a time frame for the future. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in the book that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I mean, there's still massive debates between medical experts to say what Tiny Tim, was suffering from. Like, a lot of people are saying, well, it's clear he had rickets. It's like, well, yeah, that's likely, but how come his other siblings don't have the symptoms either? If it was rickets, they'd all be having it.
And either he was never going to die of rickets, or if he was going to die of rickets, there would have been nothing Scrooge could have done to change that.
Yeah, because I mean, because a lot of medical experts.
Or I mean, if it was polio, well, okay, you could save his life, but he'd still need the crutches for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard the general consensus is that Tiny Tim probably had I forgot what the medical term is, but it's where your kidneys aren't functioning properly, so your blood's more acidic because back then it was treatable, but it was treatable and it could be even cured, but it was super duper expensive
I think he
because
just
there were
had made up itis.
yeah. Yeah, because the only treatment and cure for it at the time was you had to consume alkaline salts to neutralize the acid in your blood. I mean, some people say, well, rickets makes sense because if they had more money, they could have improved his food and all that. But the fact of the matter is, I've heard from some medical experts say by that point, if you're hobbling on a crutch, it's kind of too late. Even if you get
Well, I mean,
vitamin D
you
back,
could stop it from getting worse, but again, you wouldn't make it so that he wouldn't need a crutch.
by that point, if you're already hobbling, because Tiny Tim's still old enough, by that point, it's kind of too late to undo some of the damage. Though, believe it or not, there was actually like this YouTube guy that was talking about A Christmas Carol, and one guy said it was called In Defense of Scrooge, and one person and the lawyer representing Scrooge says, "Well, let me ask you this, spirits. You guys are all powerful. You have a direct connection to God. Why don't you cure Tiny Tim? You clearly have the magic. Why not you do it?"
There is absolutely nothing in the book that says it wasn't all a dream.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the productions do it. They have some way of confirming that they were really ghosts, but as far as the
Yeah.
book is concerned, it might have been exactly what Scrooge said he was. He was having indigestion and was having a bad dream.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another overlooked thing that proves that Ebenezer Scrooge isn't, this super rich, robber baron, that lives life in luxury while everyone else is squalor. Because I mean, rather than eating like a nice steak or lamb chop, he's eating like a pitiful, like stew or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I recall correctly, the only servant he even has is a housekeeper, and she's almost never around.
Yeah, he just lives in this tiny little cluttered up lumber room.
Yep. That's actually one thing I hate about the Mr. Magoo version of From Christmas Carol is that it removes Fred because Fred, because here's the thing about Fred. He was rich, yet he was the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the version, I mean, that's the thing that Fred hated about his uncle is that it's like, don't get me wrong, my uncle's a really rich and very good businessman, but he doesn't do anything with his money except hoard it. He doesn't invest it to improve his life. He doesn't make his business bigger. He just makes it for the sake of making it.
I don't even think it's that. I think he's just kind of, like I say, he's given up on life and he's just kind of going through the motions of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only reason why why he doesn't really do much with his money to expand his business or hire other people is just because, like you said, he's given up and he's figured out, I'm just gonna continue to do what I know what to do until I die. Also, here's another thing that many people have pointed out, that when you really think about it, Bob Cratchit isn't as needy as the book confirms him to be, because like there was actually like a mathematician that read the original book and he said actually when you really think about it, not only was Bob Cratchit reasonably wealthy, he actually was making more money than the average worker was at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people have even pointed out that Cratchit's squalor might be because, he's not being very frugal with his money.
Dickens just wasn't very good at economics.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, if you're getting your economics from Dickens, yeah, go somewhere else.
Getting your economics from anyone other than, economists should
Yeah.
probably question.
Oh, how many people, get their economics from, Elysium or whatever?
Yeah. Which, to be fair, I can see why, because unfortunately,
you make these economic arguments and they come back, well, haven't you seen the movie Elysium?
You know what's the biggest thing I always find funny about those science fiction dystopians? It's like it's a dystopian world where the super rich are super duper filthy rich and they're living lives of luxury. Meanwhile, everyone else is so poor they can't even afford to bathe. And I'm like, then where are the rich people getting their money from?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think terrible writing advice pointed that out too. It's like, how the heck is a society like that supposed to function? You know?
Or I always love when people bring up the game series BioShock as a serious critique of libertarianism. Apparently
The funny irony is that when you think about it, the problem with BioShock, wasn't that there was no government to regulate, Andrew Ryan. It was because Andrew Ryan, ironically, had a very strict no trading with the outside world policy. Like, no joke. Like, if there was anyone, from the outside world that discovered Rapture, he would kidnap them and kill them. When if he truly was a man of enterprise, he should be saying, yeah, Rapture will be its own thing, but we'll still trade with the outside world, So in a way, Andrew Ryan's problem wasn't that he was a free market, objectivist. It's the fact that he was moving away from his own ideas because he was too stubborn, he was too isolationist.
It's just interesting when you look at a lot of the tropes in movies and see the ones where they just don't have any good reason for.
Yeah.
Like the evil rich guy or the aliens who want to take over the earth or things
Yeah.
like that. Where they just
Oh
can't
god,
think
Yeah.
can't think up a good reason
the
why that would happen.
the evil CEO/evil business person trope
Yeah,
is so overplayed.
Yeah, Mr. CEO, I have a question. Yeah. Okay, so how is genetically modifying a virus to turn people into monsters gonna make us money? That's especially like with the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. It's like,
I mean, there
Or
are
yeah,
there
the
are
evil
ways to do it.
corporation.
There are ways to do it, like you've got you've got a big corporation where they're trying to do some research, and then something bad happens, and so they try to cover it up,
yeah.
and then you got to go through
You
and
know,
figure out what it is and why are they covering it up, that kind of thing.
My issue with the Weyland-Yutani Corporation is that they're intentionally, trying to breed the xenomorphs, even though they've demonstrated multiple times these things are not profitable. Like, even in the expanded universe where they try to make, the Weyland-Yutani's motivation make more sense, it still doesn't make sense because, like many people have pointed out, there's literally nothing the xenomorphs can do that can be profitable. I mean, yeah, they could, make a scientific curiosity, but especially when you really when you really think about it, the way the xenomorphs behave, they already behave pretty similar to animals that exist on Earth. In fact, if I recall correctly, according to the writers of the movies, the xenomorphs were largely based off of certain species of wasps. Even their reproduction cycle is very similar.
Another thing I never understood is what was the motivation behind the bad guys in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
That never made any sense to me.
Well, the funny irony is that, and ironically, Nostalgia Critic pointed this out, is that there really weren't any bad guys in Jurassic Park, not even in the Lost World. Like, so many people are like, oh yeah, Engine's evil in the Lost World. It's like, for what? They want to take the animals off the island and put them in a zoo, and that's evil because...
But I mean, I like in the first one where, they paid Wayne Knight to shut off the electricity and, that's what started everything. What was their motivation behind that?
Well, to my knowledge, because I've read the original book too, the whole point of shutting down the park was not the motivation. They just wanted the embryos. What had happened was that Nedry was just... the whole point of shutting down the security system was basically just to be a diversion. The plan for Nedry was he would shut down the security system, cause enough disruption, and then undo everything, and then it would just be like, oh, it must have been a massive glitch in the system because it was established, earlier that because it was a brand new park, it was, a little glitchy. It was a little glitchy, and he was going to excuse that. But the problem was that was that one, a hurricane occurred, which got him lost, which ended up with the fate it did, and two was that the computer virus he used was too powerful. And it's implied that even if he did survive his encounter with the officers and he came back, he probably wouldn't have been able to undo it because it had spread, it had worked too well. Because if I recall correctly, it was only supposed to shut down, like, the cameras and the automatic door locks. It wasn't supposed to shut down the fences.
Yeah, but I just don't get what the purpose of it all was.
Yeah.
Because they kind of made it sound like, oh, well, they want to make their own dinosaurs, but the scientist published how he did it. He was telling everyone, hey, this is exactly what we did and how we did it. So why would
not yet, because in the first movie, it's a secret. Jurassic Park wasn't going to open up to the public.
In the movie they went through, they had all that, animation with the animated DNA person and how they were taking, what was it? Was it amphibians they were taking the genes from to fill in the missing genome?
Yeah, but Biosyn didn't know that.
Well, why didn't they? They were telling everyone who came to the park.
Because Biosyn was a rival company. But Biosyn was a rival
they
company.
They were the first ones there.
Yeah.
They were the first ones there. Also, the video was just a general description. It didn't go into specifics.
Well, no, they did. Well, maybe not in the video itself, but the scientist was basically telling everyone exactly how he did it. About.
Well, I mean, and I mean, it's the dialogue too, because it's heavily implied that the rival company probably would have figured it out. But as Dennis Nedry pointed out, 15 minutes in, your company will save up on 10 years of research. Basically, they just wanted to speed rush. They didn't care about the process. They're like, give us a fixed result now so we can reverse engineer it. I guess that's what they were aiming for.
Reverse engineering it would have taken just as long as developing it.
Yeah.
And I mean, with the information they had in the presentation, it's like, okay, we've got the genome. We'll get some amphibians of our own, fill in the missing genome, make our own embryos.
Yeah.
What was it that they needed that they couldn't just get on their own just as easily?
Yeah, as Buffett pointed out, the park wasn't open yet. It was a sneak peek. My guess is the rival company later revealed to be Biosyn in the book. It was probably, they were just probably trying to get early access, Though the funny irony is that in the Lost World Jurassic Park, Peter Ludlow explains that the dinosaur process was patented. So if Biosyn really wanted to figure out what engine was doing, just go to the patent office. That's a thing that a lot of fiction ignores,
Yeah, because when you get a patent, you have to publish exactly how you did it.
Yeah.
That's the exchange. That's the deal. Because you get it patented, you tell everyone how you do it, and that's kind of the deal for having the monopoly for 15 years or whatever the term is. But then right when the patent expires, everyone can already have been working on their own version and have it out as soon as the patent expires. Whereas if you don't want anyone to know about it, you don't patent it, you keep it a trade secret.
Yeah, fun fact. Yeah, many people have actually pointed out Plankton from SpongeBob SquarePants. He didn't need to steal the Krabby Patty formula because in the episode Imitation Crab, SpongeBob just mentioned that the Krusty Krab secret formula is protected by law, which means it's either patented or trademarked. So really, all Plankton would have to do is go to the Bikini Bottom patent office, ask to see the Krabby Patty secret formula, and then you just have to say, okay, how can I tweak this formula so it's still the same formula, but it's different enough that I can file my own patent?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's a trick, companies do all the time to bypass patents.
They keep making it out like it's a trade secret. But it's weird because all he would have to do is buy a Krabby Patty.
Yeah.
And then he could have his big computer person examine it herself.
That's another thing. That's another thing too that many people have pointed out. Like, he's making money somehow. Why not just pay someone to buy a Krabby Patty?
Yeah. Hey, go in here, buy a Krabby Patty to go and give it to me.
Yeah. To be fair, though, that's kind of the whole point about Plankton is that, many people have pointed this out, is that Plankton could easily steal the Krabby Patty formula, but because he's a narcissistic evil genius, he has to do it in, like, these complicated scientific ways, I think that's kind of the joke, You know, walking in and buying a Krabby Patty or paying someone to do that, that's too simple. That's something simpletons do. I am an evil genius.
But I mean, at least SpongeBob is supposed to be an absurdist comedy. What's Jurassic
Yeah.
Park's excuse?
Yeah.
Well, it's after 10 o'clock, so.
Okay.
And I think I'm
All right, I'm
about to
heading
fall
out. See
asleep
you
where I'm
guys.
sitting, so I need to be getting to
Okay.
bed.
Okay, good night.
All right, thanks for joining, guys.
Yep.
All right, everyone, until next time, stay strong and be free.